What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Today's guest is someone with experience across all sectors of business, from development to operations to marketing. Her hospitality career started with Gordon Ramsay, Marco Pierre White, and Fortnum & Mason. She's worked with massive companies worldwide like JetBlue, Disney, Marriott, and Four Seasons, and she's been a part of the beloved AvroKO family for nearly 20 years. She's the managing partner of AvroKO Hospitality Group. Ladies and gentlemen, Marion Emmanuelle Bullôt. Welcome. Bienvenue.
Merci. Hey, Dan.
Or how do they say hello or good morning in New Zealand? Because this might be one of the furthest recordings I've had as you're in New Zealand and I'm in Connecticut.
That's right. So it's 7:25 in the morning for me. So we say g'day.
Oh, you do say g'day. Sometimes I get concerned, like upsetting Australians or New Zealanders by saying the wrong thing. So thank you.
You're fine. You're fine.
So I just want to let everyone know, I'm very excited to have Marion on because A, I'm a big AvroKO fanboy, but B, we were actually in the same place at the same time 17 years ago at the restaurant Public. And I remember, I don't remember meeting her, but I'm sure she was there somewhere. But my vivid memory is I had just gotten the new iPhone right as it launched. And then I went and I sat down with Christina and William in that little front area on Elizabeth Street. And it was like the touch screen thing. People had Blackberries and it was like this new thing. And I remember Christina said, "Oh, can I try it?" And I remember she typed out, "The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog," which basically includes every single letter in the alphabet if you type that sentence, just to get the feel for it. And it was like this really cool thing. Like, I just remember it, and I'm glad we were there at the same time. And welcome back from halfway around the world.
Thanks, Dad. I have a weird, vague recollection of this as well. So whether it was a shared experience and I was actually at the table, or whether it's one of those things where everyone's tried typing that sentence on the first, iPhone they got their hands on, who knows? But it's nice to see you again. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I'm sure there was a lot of martinis or Negronis or something involved too. So it probably blurs the edges and memory as well. But anyway, welcome. It's so great to see you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's bright and early here in New Zealand, and I've literally just got back a couple of days ago. So I'm still technically in the same time zone as you. The body is slowly adjusting.
Your soul is catching up to you.
That's it.
As you know, every conversation I ask what hospitality means to someone or how they define it. And I think, speaking to you as managing partner for AvroKO Hospitality Group, I think what's really interesting is that not only does AvroKO design, which I think most of us and most of the listeners know here, but also there's owning and operating and branding. And there's so many cool different channels of your business that have evolved over the years. And I think that you, sitting at the head of the hospitality group, have a pretty good overview of all those different channels. But at the core, like, hospitality is what ties everything together. So before we get into our awesome conversation, like, what does hospitality mean to you? How do you define it?
Sure. No, and exactly as you said, it's hard because hospitality is everything, right? It's my being, it's my passion, it's my career. So it's hard to put in a few words. But if I really have to, I guess I'll say it's the art, the science, the psychology, the business of taking care of others through experiences that may involve eating, drinking, sleeping, connecting with others. So that's not revolutionary as such, but I think what I'm especially passionate about is that we all have a very personal view of hospitality because it connects to some very personal and sort of fundamental human needs and some of our earliest memories are somewhat rooted in hospitality. So whilst we can sort of all agree as to what, hospitality is on paper, it goes through our personal lens, our personal experience, and it becomes quite unique to all of us. So, I have lots of early childhood memories that tie into hospitality, and And I just love that it carries it comes with me through my day to day, through my work, and through everything I do.
And you have many different accents battling with each other, right? I hear French, I hear New Zealand, I hear America, I hear like it's a global, you have a global accent and it's pretty cool. But when you talk about your childhood, just to give people context, where was that? Where were those childhood memories of experiencing hospitality and like what what about those memories put you on this path?
Yeah. So I grew up in the south of France, and I'm hoping we have a few wine lovers listening because it's always easier to explain where I'm from with wine folks. But I'm from the Rhone Valley in France. So if you're familiar with Côte d'Ivoire, with Cornelieu, with all those great wine appellations, this is where I'm from. And whilst we have this kind of a very romanticized ideas of this part of the world, at the time it was a pretty depressed area. Economically, there was just not a lot going on. And I was still reading from sort of, as crazy as it sounds, makes me sound really old, but still reading from the sort of the World War II sort of effects, and things were pretty depressed. So I was quite desperate to get out of there. I think my personality, I was quite kind of energetic and excited to do lots of things, and I kept being told, no, you can't do that for that reason. No, you can't do this. And so some of my earliest memories were actually in France. We don't go to school on Wednesday afternoons. Don't ask me why. But my grandmother was taking care of me on Wednesday afternoons, and she was born in 1907. She went through both world wars and was really personally impacted. Her husband was wrong place, wrong time. Was met an accidental prisoner of war in the Second World War, and so she had to sustain her family with whatever she could. So she would get a chicken from the neighbor and something else from the community. And she basically built this kind of a self-sustainable environment to support her 4 kids. And when she was taking care of me, I guess her legacy and her way to take care of me was to sort of teach me how to take care of my family with nothing. So she would give me 10 francs, which I don't actually know what that is in today's currency, but it's not a lot, and task me to find a way to feed my family for a couple of days. And so I had to be resourceful and had to, vegan earmuffs here, but I had to go and borrow chickens from the neighbors and just find, I asked them and like, hey, you're going to be, are you using every part of the animal here? Can I get something from you? So I would make like chicken brain pancakes or things like that.
Ooh.
So it's a little crazy, but it just gave me that sort of understanding that you can take care of others through food. And it's obviously a fundamental need, right? But it became part of my sort of my being to want to sort of take care of others through food. So that was the first part that tied to those fundamental human needs. And then I was exposed to the magic of hospitality, and that's a whole other thing. So my experience with, even some early memories with Keith McNally and some, my early work with Gordon Ramsay. And so I think it was the combination of those fundamental things plus the transportative magic excitement of hospitality that made me fall in love with it.
Okay, so from childhood and 10 francs and chicken brain pancakes. And now I have to try those because I've never heard of such a thing. And that sounds pretty awesome. I mean, in a weird way.
Yeah.
But I definitely want to try this. So maybe when we're together, we can go find a chicken or chicken brain pate pancakes. But as a child and going on these adventures and working with constraints, actually, when I think about the business of hospitality, those constraints of the 10 francs probably have really done wonders for you on your career path. But how did you wind up going from that to working with the likes of McNally and Gordon Ramsay? And I don't know why I wrote this down, but as you were talking about it, you said no, you can't. Like you heard this no, you can't. But like, how did that inspire you to keep pushing forward? And like, how did you wind up with two and more of these like incredible luminaries in our industry?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. And I never worked with Keith McNally, but I had a funny anecdote. My brother, my ex-brother-in-law, was the GM of Balthazar when it opened. So I was a kid. My family and I flew from France to be at the opening, and I just have those vivid memories of, everyone knows Balthazar, right? Of this like insane space. And obviously, I was so little, didn't speak any English, and it's this huge restaurant. And I remember they were waiting for their liquor license to come through. So the back bar that we all know so well was actually filled with Evian bottles. I have this vivid image in my head. And I was sitting in one of the booths across from the bar with my family, and Keith McNally, just, the young restaurateur that he was at the time, came and sat next to me. And I was pretty intimidated and impressed. And he says a couple of basic words to me, like, who are you? What's your name? And I responded, and I was like, what's your name? And he said, Keith. And I guess, didn't speak English. And I looked at him and I was like, oh, kiss, like a kiss. This is the most beautiful name I've ever heard. And he just like burst out laughing. And it was like, literally no one's ever told me that was the most beautiful name. So I guess for years after that, he would, call me the French girl who likes his name anytime I saw him. But, I was in business school in France and wanted to learn English. And I saw that as my way to escape those restraints that we were talking about. And I was in New York for the summer of 2001 to learn English, right? And I got lucky to get a job at Man Ray, which was, I don't know if you recall, it was this super hot restaurant on 15th between 6th and 7th that opened in 2001 that was owned by Robert De Niro, Al Pacino. So, talk about the magic of hospitality. Little French Marion from, the Valley de Rhône finds herself in this 400-seat glitzy restaurant that was featured on Sex and the City and all those things. I fell in love with it and decided to take a year off business school to learn English. But obviously September 11th happened. So I did not stay in New York and found myself going to London, which was the nearest, the closest place to France. And I was lucky enough to knock on the door of Gordon Ramsay. And I was lucky enough to start working with him at Claridge's the day that he was awarded his first Michelin star at Claridge's. So he already had 3 Michelin star at Gordon Ramsay, his eponymous restaurant on Royal Hospital Road. But that day he got his first Michelin star, and I could, there was a real sort of shift at that point. He went from being, a chef, a very acclaimed chef with a restaurant to, that suddenly he has 2 restaurants, and there was just a lot going on. And anecdotally, I was still didn't speak much English at all, and he saw me and he was like, who are you? What are you doing here? In a very kind of Gordon way, very assertive, very fast. And I'm like, oh, I'm Marion. I just started here. And he was like, what's your deal? And I was like, I'm excited to work with you. And I'm standing next to those cheese trolleys. We have a British and a French one. They each have 40 cheeses on them. And he's like, what's this cheese? I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know. I've literally just started today. And he's like, well, you have until tomorrow to tell me everything about all of those cheeses. And if you don't know, tomorrow you're gone. And I was kind of like enraged a little bit. I just didn't really know who he was. So it wasn't kind of like, oh, I have to sort of get it right. It was more like, who's this guy? What's going on?
Wow.
So I remember I was closing that night. So, you finish at 2, I live an hour away. I was starting at 9 the following day. I'm like, when am I going to do this? But I was just so enraged that I just don't remember how, but I learned it and learned them all. And the following day he rocks up and he comes to me and is like, what's this cheese? What's this cheese? What's that cheese? And I knew them all. I don't know if it was luck or if I legitimately had learned them all. And he was like, all right, come and see me in my office and we'll chat. And I remember going downstairs and chatted. And, he basically said something to the extent of, we've got some big things ahead. And I think I'd like you to be part of the journey. He was like, how do you feel about that? And I was like, that sounds awesome. Sign me up. And then he said, which I'll remember forever, said, I'm going to use some beeps for the words that are probably not safe for the pod, but he said something to the extent of, if you want to be on this journey, you better lose that beep French accent of yours. It makes you beep sound lazy. And to make it worse, he said it in French because obviously he speaks perfect French, right? So he made his point. Yeah.
That's unreal. So I have like different categories for people, and I thought that persona was like a TV persona.
No.
But also like his success and everything that there's many different ways to achieve what he's achieved, right? But one of those archetypes of personality I call uncompromising visionary, and it's really almost like a Bonaparte or a Caesar or a I don't know you name the star architect, but so much good can come out of that, but there's like a cost along the way because I wonder how many people just fell aside and lost their love for hospitality and the passion that you had. You rose to the occasion, but no harm, no foul on how he runs. Like some people just are wired to go a certain way, and I trust and respect how they do that. But there's so many different types of personalities that have achieved success in our world, and maybe that's a really good segue to having that experience and learning so much. then coming to New York, finding AvroKO, and then kind of how what you've helped build there, and how it's achieved success, but maybe in a different way. And really thinking about, like, I don't know, from the business and the execution, and like, I think what's so unique about, from a design perspective with AvroKO, and all the projects and everything that's been amazing that you guys have worked on, and all the critically acclaimed, and all the awards that you've won. But you guys also operate a lot of businesses, and food and beverage businesses, and branding businesses. And I'm just curious, like, how that difference has kind of helped you spread your wings and grow, and really rise to the occasion to become a managing partner, or the managing partner of AvroKO Hospitality Group.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. Yeah, it's, I loved AvroKO. I had my eyes on it when I was living in the UK. But hey, I'm not a designer, right? So I just, I had this idea that I would one day join AvroKO, but thought, how do I fit here? And yeah, my experience specifically working with Gordon, I've really learned every aspect of the hospitality. Even we work in back of house, front of house, kitchen, the bar, all kinds of things that give me a kind of a speedy management training, right? I never went to hospitality school or anything like that, but I felt like I got a bit of a shortcut to that. So I had a really good holistic kind of view of the hospitality industry, which, given that AvroKO, when I started in 2007, that year that you and I potentially had a drink together, we still don't know. The AvroKO was quite unique in the sense where it was a design practice with a focus on hospitality. And in order to sort of show that, hey, we're going to do hospitality design differently, actually open a restaurant, which is quite remarkable when you think of it. And not a small restaurant, right? Public was a 5,000 square foot restaurant that used to be a muffin factory. It was quite a visionary exercise to sort of turn that into a restaurant, and an incredibly successful restaurant, no less. I mean, it won 2 James Beard Awards the year it opened, and obviously had a Michelin star for 8 years. So it just, the AvroKO was a design practice, but rooted in hospitality. And I think I went along for the ride because I could speak to that hospitality piece, which was the sort of the backbone of the work. And, when,
Wait, hold on one second. Public had a Michelin star?
yeah, we got it in 2008.
So to me, I just looked at that as an awesome neighborhood restaurant, like, and I loved it, and it was so casual and comfortable. I had no idea it had a Michelin star. Wow, that makes it even more amazing. In It's like a humble brag almost, but like, it made it more amazing in, like, looking back in retrospect. Wow.
And suddenly push boundaries because obviously, Michelin in a lot of people's minds means tablecloths and formal service, right? It was just no tablecloths, music raging. And so it's an interesting one because you kind of always towing the line of like, I want to have this genuine, exciting kind of hospitality experience, but I kind of obviously need to maintain my standards to keep that style, right? So it was, it was an interesting journey.
That's amazing. And then also, when I think about the projects that you guys have designed, but even on the F&B stuff that you own and operate, and also have designed or consulted on, there's like this certain element of, I don't know if it's like, I guess, luxury, or like that, like, of a certain level, right? But there's a whole spectrum of projects that you guys have worked on. And there's some really interesting um, areas that I was actually surprised to learn from you that you're going into, and like, basically placemaking for places that would not be a typical project or clientele or whatever that you'd be working on. Like, what's most exciting about all those other channels? Like, and if you want to share some of those channels that y'all are working on.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I could speak about that for hours. But yeah, and you're exactly right. Like most people know of AvroKO as the interior design practice that works exclusively in the almost exclusively in the sort of the high-end luxury world, designing those jewel box type sort of restaurants and hotels and whatnot. But that's true of AvroKO, but we have other companies within the group, including AvroKO Hospitality Group, which obviously I'm representing today, Brand Bureau, et cetera, that are global practices that work across all tiers and sectors within the hospitality industry. And that might mean, of course, luxury as well, right? We work very closely with AvroKO on a lot of projects, but that might also mean anything from cruise ships. We worked with Richard Branson on the F&B strategy and concept development for Virgin Voyages, which was his take on cruise ship that launched a few years ago. We do a lot of fast casual work. A super interesting area at the moment is all inclusives, which you wouldn't think again as an AvroKO project. It's not an AvroKO design project, but it's an AvroKO strategy project. And there's a lot happening in that lot happening in this area where literally every flag that you can think of, every hotel group that you can think of is rushing to develop an all-inclusive experience, as there's a tremendous amount of interest from the travelers post pandemic, and from a business sense, it's great. It's a little more predictable and a little safer than your traditional EP, your traditional resort or hotel. So we're seeing a lot of activity in all inclusives. And some other parts of hospitality work that we do. And again, I'm passionate about hospitality, and I guess I'm most passionate about the power of hospitality. So we advise a lot of folks on how to use that power, right? How to use the power of hospitality in placemaking, talking to a lot of developers doing great work in major cities and advising them on how to strategize around the use of hospitality in their developments. Also do a bunch of work with, brands and thinking about hospitality experiences through a brand lens. It's quite a different experience than developing a physical space, right? Like another example is we're working with National Geographic Society at the moment under a strict NDA, so I'll talk about what I can talk about. Essentially, they're working on a very substantial, very significant development in DC, their hometown, and we're basically being tasked to develop food and beverage experiences, food and beverage concepts, that will be the first time National Geographic has never had restaurants and bars, right? So
what an incredibly experiential concept, because Nat Geo, that's like the ultimate experience when you think about just their whole catalog of old magazines and the brand and travel, and wow.
I anecdotally asked one of our clients, as part of a brainstorming session, we're talking about the ocean, and I was like, hey, what's the best way for me to get a hold of anything you guys have, on ocean and the sea? And they have this huge catalog, right? They have this huge archive and database. And he just went in and he said something to the extent of like, I have 13,242 entries. How would you like me to share this with you? So, it's just an incredibly fascinating project, because you really have to think about F&B through the lens of that brand, through the lens of its mission, and with all the sort of the content that's available. And, when people ask me what I do and I explain, I think people think, oh gosh, so you create this like super cool themed environments. And my head, I think like Rainforest Cafe, nothing wrong with the Rainforest Cafe, but this is not what we do. We sort of really try to find the sort of the unique sort of point of view and the narrative to sort of create unique environments that are sort of really ownable by the brand, that makes sense and that evoke the sort of the right feelings, not dissimilar to sort of when designers create this kind of really rich and exciting concept narrative that, will be experienced through the design. We often can do that through the lens of a brand, is really trying to sort of connect guests to that brand through the experience.
I find, like, going back to the public experience and then all the other projects that I've actually been into, like from Asia to throughout North America, and I'm sure in Europe, but I can't think of one right now. But whenever I walk into one of the places that you guys have worked on, there's just, I don't know how to describe it other than there's like this, like, it's like a glow or a warmth or I don't know. I just feel like I'm in it's not like a brand or a narrative's hitting me over the head, but I feel immersed in it. And I don't really know how to put that into words. But I think, going back to that no you can't or the constraint thing, I'm intrigued to how you could get that glow or that warmth or that feeling working within a cruise ship where there's incredible constraints on one side, to all the other projects where you know, from your operational experiences with restaurants and just in any F&B situation, you have a constraint of a P&L and a balance sheet as well, right? Because you have to make money. Or I don't know, like, how do you guys address those constraints of like the physical constraints, but how does your experience operating these places, owning and operating these places, and working within the constraint of a P&L and a balance sheet, how do you bring that perspective to all of the projects? I assume all of the projects that you're working on.
That's such a good question, and I think that's part of what has always connected me to AvroKO. As yes, AvroKO is an interior design practice, but because we have that backbone of hospitality, and because the vast majority of our designers actually have worked in restaurants, so I've kind of hopped behind the bar, being one of our bars or just a bar, to sort of understand how it works. And because we spend some time talking about, yeah, how does a restaurant P&L work, and there's a broad understanding of the industry and what it takes to make a restaurant work, that I think is at the back of everyone's mind at all times. And it's so important. We're chatting, you and I, and you were asking me, like, if you had a magic wand, I'd say, hey, I have a magic wand. I just wish everybody who touches hospitality in any way, I wish everybody could either work in a restaurant for a week or two, or read a playbook about, how restaurants work and the P&L. And even, I found myself how many times for clients or staff, or I've done a kind of a back of a napkin, hey, this is a restaurant P&L, right? You've got your revenue and you've got all your kind of buckets of cost, from labor to food and et cetera, and that leaves very small margins. And then if you think about the investment that's required to open a restaurant, it's huge, and you have those very small margins, and that means your payback period is, you're lucky if you pay back your initial investment in 5-6 years. But hey, at the same time, 80% of restaurants in the US close within the first 5 years. So what does that mean? Where does that leave us? So it's an incredibly challenging business, but I think that's where we thrive, is by knowing you have to go face the reality, right? You can't design a concept and experience in a vacuum and just stick some cool shit to the wall and hope it sticks. You have to work within reality, the reality of this industry. And I think that's what is unique about us, is that we think about those things. We ask the questions, we challenge, because we're like, hey, we want this to work. We want this to work for everyone. Yeah, we're pretty open-eyed about that.
On the bar or restaurant front, when you talk about the just the investment, right? So the types of projects
Yeah.
that you're working on, I assume, have a tremendous capital investment up front, right? Because you're really transforming a space to get this glow and warmth. But when you're speaking to an owner, how do you say, "Hey, we have this vision. You're talking to us first of all, so we have a shared vision." Number one.
Mhm.
Number two,
Mhm.
we think that this perspective and this execution and this investment is going to pay back in 5 or fewer years, and these
Mhm.
are all the reasons why. How do you get some of your clients to, if they have any kind of nervousness or trepidation about taking that step, how do you kind of convince them or give them um, support and strength of, like, okay, this is the right decision, let's go,
Mhm.
being an owner of F&B locations on your
Right.
own? Like, how do you
Right.
take that, your experience, and say, okay, come along with me and trust?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really cool question. And I think, that what you just described is kind of was the impetus of this division that I run within the part of the AvroKO family, is that strategy piece, right? And
Yeah.
because oftentimes we'd find ourselves, having clients approach us in the AvroKO world and say, hey, can you design my restaurant? And we'd have questions. We'd be like, what are we designing? Like, who is going to come to that restaurant? Why will they come? Why do they care? Or it could be that folks, ask us to design their restaurant and say, hey, like, you guys are owners and operators. Like, what would you do? What would you design? What kind of concept would you do? So we found ourselves doing a lot of kind of back of a napkin. This is, we get to your board, we go to public, we go to another restaurant, probably have a couple of Negronis, and we get excited and write a whole bunch of stuff on a napkin. And we're like, actually, we can do a lot better than that. And that was, I mean, granted, that was 15 plus years ago. So over the years, we've really developed a quite a unique process, essentially strategy process, which is the core of what my team and I do, right? It's strategy and concept development, to sort of really give a strong foundation to projects. So I'd say about sort of 30 to 40% of projects we work on, we collaborate with AvroKO, meaning we'll do that early part, right? We'll do that strategy and that concept development and develop the why of a concept, and then AvroKO would design. And I think, and I know you have a lot of designers listening, and I'm sure they've all been in that situation where they start designing, a project, super excited, you love the brief, you jump right in, and then you're like, oh, this is cool. I'm thinking of the narrative, I'm thinking of all those things. and you start designing and you're in concepts or even in schematic, and you're like, well, actually, I have questions, right? It's like, who am I designing for? Like, who's coming? How long are they here for? What kind of experience? Like, okay, there's an open bar, there's an open kitchen, but are they sitting at that open kitchen? And this bar is super cool that I'm designing, but wait, what's actually happening at the bar? Like, are people just, is it 3D 5 days a week, or is it a bar that people will sit at and have like an elevated experience at? So we essentially, when we collaborate with AvroKO, we're here to sort of answer a lot of those questions and develop that robust sort of concept foundation that, to our previous point, is rooted in the realities of restaurants, right? We're developing concepts that make sense financially and operationally, and we're uniquely positioned to do so because we are owners ourselves. But we also kind of want to create concepts that stick, things that, you know, are interesting, that people want to go to. And that's really that sort of that strategy piece where we think about the why and the when and who's going to be going to those restaurants and for what reason, and why are they going to be excited to go, and why do they want to tell their friends, and why do they want to come back. And so we have a whole sort of process that we've developed essentially, which constitutes literally what I spend my days doing is that, finding the why and developing experiences around the world that AvroKO, other designers can bring to life essentially.
So I want to pull on this one a bit, where if you said the hospitality group is working and coming up with a strategy for countless restaurants
Mhm.
or bars, 30 to 40% of the projects are
Mhm.
AvroKO design. But what
Mhm.
are the 60 to 70
Yeah.
that are by others? Like, how are you brought in, and how do you play well with other design firms who are executing it?
Yeah. Well, I think we play, I'd like to say, exceptionally well because design is in our DNA. That's, you know, part of our being part of the family. So we speak the same language, right? And the work that we do when we're not collaborating with AvroKO oftentimes will involve issuing a brief to interior designers and supporting through the development. So again, if I use, you know, the National Geographic project as an example, we've developed the concept. We've issued a brief as to what the interiors, you know, all the things that the designers should know to design that space. And then we continue staying involved through the design process to sort of bring that hospitality piece and be, you know, candidly be the guardians of the concept we've developed, right? Because oftentimes things sort of shift through design, and we kind of bring that expertise and bring the sort of with the advocates of that concept to make sure it gets executed per the vision and per what's been approved by the clients and whatnot. So, and because we speak that language, we're able to give, I think, quite clear and quite constructive sort of feedback that will resonate and will be easy to interpret for those designers. So I think we do play nice, and it's exciting to see other folks sort of design work as well. So yeah, I think that's a piece that folks don't necessarily think about is, yeah, we collaborate with AvroKO, but as I said, it's probably only in sort of 30-ish% of cases.
Wow. So again, that's amazing. So on the 70%, if you have a new project kicking off,
Mm.
you as AvroKO Hospitality Group, then are you doing it in a silo within AvroKO, or are you saying like, hey, Brand Bureau, help me come up with the branding. Hey, um, F&B group, like let's come up with a P&L and
Mhm.
figure out staffing and operationally how
Yeah.
everything works. Hey, design, you're not going to be working on this, but like help us just come up with something to like kind of get it into the neighborhood of what this owner is
Yeah.
or client is trying to develop. Is it, so do you break down those walls for all the projects that you're working on and bring all that to the table?
Yeah, we do to some extent. I mean, it's very much part of our DNA. You know, like we've talked about, I've been in the company for 17 years and I've managed interior design projects. I'm co-manager of Brand Bureau, our brand studio, and a lot of the folks that are with me in the AvroKO Hospitality Group have similar backgrounds. So between our kind of personal experiences and the processes we've developed, a lot of that is embedded in the process. But oftentimes, yeah, we'll bring in AvroKO folks and say, hey, we're working on this super cool concept. Here's what we're doing, etc. Can you help us sort of flesh out this piece? Or can I get your thoughts on that piece? And having access to that, right? Having access to this pool of experts internally is amazing. And in addition to that, what I think is quite unique, because obviously AvroKO is, you know, we have offices in Bangkok, London, San Francisco, Miami, et cetera, et cetera. And the design work is very localized, you know, and there's a clear jurisdiction for each office, which makes sense, right? Because oftentimes the design needs to be informed by, you know, a lot of the local context, and you need to know about your vendors and resources and whatnot. Whereas on the AvroKO Hospitality Group side and Brand Bureau, we have the core teams in house, but we work globally. So we literally have folks in, you name it, all over the place, in Spain, in New Zealand, as we've talked about, in the US, in Southeast Asia, because the work we do is very broad. As we've discussed, AvroKO works pretty much exclusively in the luxury realm, whereas one day we may be working on a fast casual concept in Peru, and then the next day we may be developing a high-end bar experience in Japan. And we need to understand that local context, and we also need to have folks that have expertise in that local context in that particular area. It takes a very different experience to develop a high-end bar than it does to develop a fast casual concept. So we have a lot of folks that we bring in, actually consultants. We have a network of trusted consultants that we work with regularly, that we bring in on projects based on the project needs, that we marry obviously with our internal team that has that AvroKO DNA, right? That understands about restaurant operations, that understands about design and branding and all of those things. And we marry that specialized and localized knowledge with the AvroKO DNA. And I think that that's what's quite unique about us. It's just I think that's, we assume that everything comes out of New York, but we actually have that sort of that brand trust, that core team that we pair with local experts, essentially.
So going back to the constraint thing, so a cruise ship is a constraint, but walk me
Yeah.
through in that 70% where you're not doing the design, like all inclusive is definitely growing, and
Yeah.
all the brands are very hot to trot in it. It's a real good growth
Mhm.
area. But
Mhm.
like a cruise ship without as many constraints, obviously there are still constraints, but you have so many different F&B experiences. I actually I've always wanted to bring my family on it. We've traveled a lot. I've always wanted to go just try an all inclusive. I've never done it, but I want to for some reason. I really want to try it. But like, how do you take your hospitality group and all of your experience from branding and operations, et cetera, and give us an example of a project where you're not doing the design and like how you're bringing your expertise into that far flung exotic place, and
Yeah.
like how you're getting all those different parties to work together.
Well, that involves experiencing the product and the experiences. So that involves a lot of travel, a lot of eating, a lot of drinking. Do you wanna join us
Yes, I'll
then?
go. We'll go without the kids first. Just a grown we'll do a grown-up trip first. Okay, good.
Yeah. Well, part of our process is obviously to understand the ask, and oftentimes understand the problem or the challenge, right? If it was easy to crack, folks would do it themselves. It's like,
Mhm.
why do you bring in a third party? It's just, super easy to figure out. So we have a process that enables us to sort of really understand the local sort of context. If we're talking about a specific, a project, then it's a particular
Yeah,
area.
bring us to a country. Put us in a country.
Okay, a recent project, well, very dear to my heart as well. We're developing concepts for three very iconic, sorry, we just have so many NDAs, a very iconic five-star hotel brands in French Polynesia. So two in Bora Bora and one in Tahiti. So needless to say, we had to travel to the location, and that was horrible. Um, but again, it's what we bring to the table. It's a process that gives, in this case, the owners the confidence that where the food and beverage experiences have really been considered, and there's been a sort of there's been strategic work done to ensure that all everyone's sort of key concerns were really considered, and that we were thinking about the sort of the whatever success looks like, right? In this instance, is having hotels that becomes part of the top 10 hotels in the world, and listed them, across all the sort of the usual sort of lists. And how do we do that? We know that F&B and hospitality plays a huge part of that. So how do we create F&B outlets that are compelling, sustainable, that make sense for the brand? So we have an entire process to essentially come to those sort of conclusions. So it's really about understanding who's doing what locally. Like folks are, okay, so we're talking about Bora Bora, for example. There's just incredible properties. You have the Four Seasons and the Conrad and two Intercontinentals. I mean, it's just really, really beautiful properties. Like, so who's going there? Why? Are they going there? What's already there? Is there a white space? Is it something that no one's doing? Is there a particular something that we're trying to solve? I mean, a very specific kind of micro sort of problem here is, it's very difficult to go from one island to the other. We're doing some interviews with some guests and some staff, and they're saying, it's as much as we love Bora Bora, it's beautiful. We found ourselves a little bit constrained. Like you're there for 2, 3 days, and you get a little bit bored of sitting at the beach, and it's very difficult to go from one island to the other. And so one of the things we discussed with the client is like, hey, what can we do to sort of encourage that? Like, is there a way for us to bring people in from other resorts and other parts of the island to the hotel so that we can, have guests from other properties come visit to make the program more dynamic? Because in order to have, tying back the reality of restaurants, in order for restaurants to be sustainable, you need to have people in them. And
Yeah.
if you have a 150 key, luxury hotel, you know how many guests you're going to have in your room, and you know how many of them are going to be dining at your restaurants. You need to have a very compelling mix of restaurants. But in order to have those restaurants be financially sustainable, you need folks from other properties or outside of the hotel to come visit. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to sustain those restaurants.
So that's surprising to me. I never heard of an all-inclusive place wanting outsiders to come in.
It's not an all-inclusive, sorry, caveat. These are
Oh,
not
okay.
all. Yeah.
Okay. Got
It's
it. Got it.
right, the sort of the strategy piece. But yeah, so it's thinking about all of those things and what problem do we need to solve in order to sort of achieve the goals. In the context of an all-inclusive, fascinating because the first thing, when you start a project, first thing a client tells you is your budget for food and beverage per person per day. I won't share what that is because you will be shocked.
No, I
But
bet it's shocking, and that's probably why I haven't been to many, I think.
But you'd be surprised. Like what absolutely stunned me, I knew that number for the particular project we were working on, and I knew what the target number was going to be for us. And I went to probably 15 to 20 all-inclusive hotels in the Riviera Maya, and some 5+ stars, absolutely incredible experience in par with some really, really destination luxury resorts, EP resorts. I was like, how do they do it? And that's kind of like understanding the sort of the nuts and bolts is fascinating. And in this particular case, one of the key things is just critical mass and, just the fact that those properties are huge. And the beauty of all inclusives is that obviously you can control your cost. You know exactly where people are going to be, what they're going to be consuming, when you can
Yeah.
plan everything perfectly. So that control element is huge. And obviously you don't have that in an EP resort. So again, I can talk about that for but it's amazing what you can achieve in all inclusives with budgets that are really quite astonishing.
Well, it really helps to also have the captive audience, I imagine, and having
Mhm.
that the max spend, like all in for food and labor and overhead for each one. Again, that's a constraint. Like it's a shocking constraint, but it really, I think that's the best decisions and most creative outcomes usually come from when there's really extreme constraints.
100%. And I think, I mean, that's what drives all innovation, right? And I think that's what we're really excited about. And obviously the hospitality industry is very resilient, goes through tough times, and there's a lot of things that happen that create those new restrictions that we have to navigate. And that's the core of our work is, like how do we provide sustainable solutions for clients, for the projects we work on based on those raising sort of challenges. I mean, one big one that at the moment that is more prevalent in some markets, but systemic through our industry is the labor costs, right? It's just incredibly expensive to run restaurants these days. And how do you create experiences that are sustainable yet that, have that sort of that hospitality component? And it's increasingly difficult to do. And it's pushing us to sort of the use of technology, the use of really smart, sort of polished, sort of hospitality, sort of techniques and approach to hospitality in order to deliver that impactful, personal sort of experience. And it's there's no silver bullet. It's not an easy question to answer, but it's just forcing us to develop new things, new systems in order to do that.
So from the 10 franc shopping spree that grandma gave you to working for Gordon Ramsay to your evolution and growth, tremendous growth within AvroKO and
Mhm.
AvroKO's tremendous growth globally. What's exciting you about what you're seeing out in the future?
That's a really good question. I think it's the fact that, as I said, our industry is resilient and that we I think have the opportunity with the work that we do, we have the opportunity to continue to educate's the wrong word, but sort of shed light on what the industry is like and some of the challenges that it experiences. And we're able to sort of move the needle a little bit. My business partner Adam Famery and I, so Adam, one of the founders of AvroKO, in the early days of our consulting days on the strategy side, specifically, he and I were running around the world trying to speak to, the various leaders of hotel groups and basically saying like, hey, hospitality is so powerful. You think of your hotel right now as the business of rooms, but we think there's a real opportunity to sort of evolve that, and your restaurants could be a lot more than just an amenity. They could be a lot more than just a place where your guests have breakfast. And then you look at how far we've come, and that way you look at the likes of the Hoxton Chicago. I don't know if you've been there on a Saturday night, but this is a really fun place to be.
Totally.
And it's really moved the needle and really shifted the sort of the basic hotel model where I want to say probably 30% of the revenue comes from the F&B, and the halo of the appeal of the F&B has a huge impact on the hotel business itself. So it's really exciting to think about the evolution of hospitality and us being a part of that. And I think the main thing is just, helping folks that have real power to impact the industry, to make the right decisions that are right for the industry, to sort of, everyone knows the power of hospitality. Everyone knows the power of a concept within a real estate development, and for us to be able to explain that so that perhaps those real estate developers are really willing, really understanding why they should support, a young up and coming restaurateur that wants to do this really cool restaurant, but doesn't have the capital. It doesn't have the $2 million to take a 15-year lease and build this entire restaurant. So we can be part of that conversation to sort of help explain the impact that that restaurant might have, and why, a developer that's spending $250 million on a development could spend, $1 million helping a young restaurateur to sort of reduce that barrier to entry. And that to me is really exciting, to think of the role we can have, sort of helping make the hospitality industry a more sustainable business.
I would say it's not just sustainable, but like one of the evolutions I've seen in hotels over the past, I don't know, 20 years is that F&B, like you said, it was a place you could have breakfast, but it was really like a drag on the P&L. It was a laggard, right? But what I've seen, especially in the independent hotel space, and even, mostly in the independent one, you said 30% of the hotel's revenue coming from F&B. Like, that's shocking. But I've been to some independent hotel conferences where they're actually banking on, 30 to 60% of the revenue of 100 or 150 room hotel to come from the F&B, and mostly the B probably, but the F also. And it's unbelievable. But in order to do that, there's a tremendous amount of vision, strategy, investment, and execution. And that's kind of going back to that earlier question about like, how do you get an owner or a client to really take that step and invest in that restaurateur, invest in this, invest in that? Because I think many people, when they think of hospitality, they don't think of F&B taking such a prominent role or a percentage of the P&L. How have you seen that over the past 17 or 19 years since you've been at AvroKO?
We're chipping away at it. And I think, I think you've met Adam Famery. He's a pretty convincing fella. So he was certainly instrumental to sort of convincing some early folks to take the leap and just do, and give this a shot. So I think it's a combination of the fact that we understand the industry, we understand the problems, and we can speak really pragmatically to that. And I'd like to think that we have vision, and we can see sort of the path that things are taking, and the fact that by chipping away at it, and by clients sort of a handful of clients being excited to sort of jump on board with us, and us actually doing the work, we've then able to sort of showcase and be like, hey, we've done it here and it's worked. Look at this.
Yeah, it's case studies. You've developed a portfolio of case studies. It would be interesting over the past, since AvroKO's inception, to just show, or really, and since they've been doing hotels, but just to show how the percentage of revenue has grown or could grow, like I almost like do a
Totally.
graph and just show with case studies of how it's happened, because I think it's really tremendously surprising to me, and it's a real it's almost flipped hotels and the operations of hotels kind of on their head. But you kind of have to, sometimes it happens like an accident, like bottled lightning, it was not intentional. But I
Yeah.
think the more and more I'm seeing, like, you can definitely be strategic and intentional about it and really outperform your peers in whatever
Mhm.
location you're in, because of if F&B is done correctly.
That's right. And I can't tell you, I think we have some lines that we hear a lot in the past 10 years. How many projects started where we're being asked to create the next ACE lobby? How do I create the next ACE lobby? You know, when it came online, how many years ago? Probably sort of 15, 14. It was revolutionary. Everyone was like, wow, I can have a place where local folks come and hang, and not just guests of the hotel. And guests are going to want to stay in that hotel because they want to hang out with the musician who's hanging downstairs and the artist and the whatnot. And so I think there have been, you know, in our industry, whether it's projects that we've worked on or not, there have been examples that become super aspirational. And obviously, given the work that we do, we've kind of dissected those examples to the core. You know, we understand the, you know, oftentimes when we're having to sort of peel the magic layer to get to the bottom of it to understand how the mechanics work. So it's, at the end of the day, like it's a bit of magic, it's a bit of vision, but it's also, you know, we've been doing this for a long time. So
Yeah.
you become a bit of an expert. You gather, you know, data, you gather case studies, again, being your own or, you know, other projects that you see around the world. So it's, yeah, it's a bit of magic and a bit of experience, I would say.
Yeah, but it's all intentional placemaking, really,
Yeah.
right? Wow. So if you could go back to when Gordon Ramsay said that you had to lose your French accent, like, if you could be you back then, knowing everything you know now, would you have acted differently?
Oh God, no, because I think that's the journey. That's what kind of pushed me and motivated me. I think we all have our own kind of experiences that just make us who we are. I think I'd be pretty bad. And you know, he's still a friend and a mentor. He's
Do you
actually
think
from.
he would have fired you or
Yeah.
continued to hire you if you threw some of those beeps back at him?
Oh goodness, yeah, he had very little tolerance for any of that. So 100% fired. But
Oh,
that's,
he
you
wouldn't have
know,
respected you?
oh, he's no, I think he would have seen through all of that probably.
Okay,
But yeah, he doesn't take a lot of, it doesn't take a lot of shit. Let me just excuse my French, but yeah. But no, he's a fundamental. He's been to a lot of our restaurant openings and he's awesome. So yeah, very
wonderful.
thankful for him.
Well, this has just been a wonderful experience and walk down memory lane to the first iPhone and chicken brain pancakes from when you were 5. But this has just been wonderful, and, like, I don't know, it's so interesting to just see how AvroKO has evolved and created all these, specialties, and thank you for sharing the story and the vision and the path forward. I appreciate it so much. If people wanted to learn more about you or AvroKO, or AvroKO Hospitality Group, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, super easy to find me. I mean, I'm literally Marion at AvroKO.com. I'm on LinkedIn, the website and whatnot. So if you want to find me, you absolutely can. Always open to conversations for sure.
Fantastic. So, a wholehearted merci to you. I appreciate you so much for coming on from halfway around the world and sharing your story. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Also, thank you to all of our listeners. Really, we wouldn't be talking to Marion halfway around the world if it wasn't for everyone still tuning in. And there's so much learning and impact. And if anything struck a chord with you, please pass it along. I mean, we're always evolving. People are always evolving. Their needs are always evolving. And I think that businesses are always evolving. And to hear this continued and see the continued evolution, but to be able to look under the hood of AvroKO from your perspective has been really illuminating for me. So thank you. And thank you, everyone.